The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 336, relative to qualifications for obtaining a license to carry a concealed pistol or revolver.
The question is, notwithstanding the governor's veto, shall Senate Bill 336 become law? Is there any discussion? Senator Katella.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President and members of New Hampshire Senate, for the record, yes, Governor Hassan did veto Senate Bill 336. The question is, why has she continued to discriminate against the citizens of New Hampshire? Doesn't she understand that racist word was removed from Senate Bill 336? Phone calls were made to our governor to pass this bill, and they explained why. For a moment, Mr. President, let's look back to 1974, when the New Hampshire Constitution was updated to ensure that racism did not continue in New Hampshire. So why is this important? Did I just say racism in New Hampshire? In fact, in the 1800s, the laws of New Hampshire were so bad, the Supreme Court actually mentioned them in the Dred Scott decision. But the laws of New Hampshire, quote, collected and finally approved in 1815, no one was permitted to be enrolled in the militia of the state but the free white citizens. Repeat, free white citizens. To continue, Mr. President, let's look at the year 1923. Outstanding, the New Hampshire pistol license as enacted in 1923 legally discriminated against New Hampshire's ethnic minorities, primarily the Irish, the Polish, the Italians, and the French Canadians. And even the emerging private trade unions, like the United Textile Workers, the word suitable now appears. The answer is obvious. Repeat, the Italians, the Polish, the Irish, and the French Canadians were not suitable to have a gun in New Hampshire. They are not, by the institutional laws of the state of New Hampshire, numbered among this people, not suitable. That is, Mr. President, forms no part of the sovereignty of the state and is therefore not called to uphold and defend it in its militia. What does one do to have in New Hampshire? What do we need? We need a gun enough to uphold and to be part of the militia in New Hampshire. For both of these questions, the answer is the same. One needs to have that right to own a firearm. Suitable as written today, and today, in law, Mr. President, discriminates. Today, we as society should no longer allow this to happen. So why should we allow these words to remain in the book that was drafted for that specific reason? The question is, how can we continue to enforce that was designed for such an awful purpose? And why today? Activists tend to be interested in stripping away our firearms so they can trample on New Hampshire's citizens' rights. We need to correct this racist word in New Hampshire. And now, back to 1923, Mr. President. In 1923, New Hampshire, the unnaturalized foreign-born person was treated as a felon. The law specifically states an unnaturalized citizen could not own or have in his possession or under his control a pistol or revolver. They were not suitable. Yes, that word suitable again, in our laws still remains with that governor's veto. We can stop and correct this repugnant law that was been on our books for over 90 years. Remember also the equated foreign-born people as felons. Mr. President, my mom and dad were born in Sicily. They were not felons. According to the laws of New Hampshire, they are. My dad was a World War I veteran. My oldest brother was World War II. And I, Mr. President, is also a veteran of the United States. I repeat, Mr. President, 1922 racist-based firearms law with that word suitable as referenced in RSA 159:6 that was crafted to explicitly deny rights to non-whites and specific immigrants needs to go. Mr. President, I spoke before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and this bill passed 5-0. Three Republicans and 2 Democrats voted to pass this bill. However, when it came to the Senate floor, every Democrat voted against it. I wonder why. We all know why. Mr. President, suitable discriminates. Lastly, I am an elder. I am a senior citizen. I am not Sicilian American. I am an American. Mr. President, I won't take any questions. And Mr. President, I will be requesting a roll call vote so that all citizens of New Hampshire can see who's not suitable in the New Hampshire Senate. I will ask for a roll call vote, Mr. President, as of right now. Thank you. I won't take any questions.
Thank you, Senator Katella. Senator Woodburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition and that we should support the governor's veto of this bill. We've had many discussions on this, and usually our great majority leader and I talk about this issue, and I wrongly attributed a quote that he correctly attributed, and I think it's to keep this in mind. Before you take down a fence, understand why it was put up. This very practical, long-standing pause which exists today is something that is part of our history, part of our culture, and I think we need to be thoughtful around these issues. New Hampshire is a safe state, and it's a gun-friendly state. We balance public safety with private gun ownership. We practice personal restraint coupled with the vital public pause. And I just want to point, we talked about a little bit about the history, is that it was Meldrum Thompson. Meldrum Thompson. Now, the Dean of the Senate remembers Meldrum Thompson, and others do as well, and it's hard to believe that the Democratic leader would be asking you all to consider the words of Meldrum Thompson in his great book, Live Free or Die. This is a sensible handgun law. Governor Thompson further said that it seldom has been any unreasonable denials of issuing a gun permit, and such rare denials have been corrected and brought to public light. As I looked at this issue as someone from the North Country where guns are part of our culture, I've asked my constituents, I've asked my police chiefs, and no one has been able to come forward with an issue where someone was denied. It is common sense, people understand it, we use it, and it is part of our history, part of our culture, and Mr. President, I think we should vote no on this issue. Thank you.
Senator Woodburn. Senator Waters with a question of
Senator
Senator
from
Woodburn.
District 1. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for taking my question. Despite what we heard recently on the floor, would you say that this bill has nothing to do with whether or not someone can legally own a weapon? This is only about whether it can be concealed?
Thank you, Senator Waters and Professor Waters. I was concerned you might be having a survey for me, so I'm relieved. This has nothing to do with gun ownership, and as we know, there's a difference between me and you having a discussion, a heated discussion, and me having an open carry gun versus having a closed, unseen to you. There is a difference there, but this has nothing to do with it. This is a process that works. It has been on the books. Let's use conservative judgment. Let's not throw things out that have been working well for 100 years.
May I follow up? Thank you. And my next question is that we heard some history about racism in this state, and that certainly is something to be concerned, but is it not the case that the use of suitability in determining whether someone could have a concealed carry usually is applied to someone who has a mental disability or other domestic violence issue, but has never, as far as we know, been applied based on race or ethnicity?
I thank you for the question, and I think you're absolutely correct. It hasn't, and one more good reason why we should.
And one more follow-up, if I may, Mr. President. Senator, it was suggested that a vote on this issue of no would imply that one was unsuitable to serve in the New Hampshire Senate. Do you agree with that?
I must say that I find that hard to understand.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I rise and ask the body to overturn the governor's veto on Senate Bill 336. We have had, over the last 2 years, much discussion. But let's look again at the facts. We are an open carry state. That means if you're legally entitled under federal law and state law to be able to have a gun, you're legally entitled to have a gun. All repeal of the permit would do is allow you to carry it on a concealed basis, what you already have the right to do on an open basis without having to get a permit, and yes, under the statute, prove your suitability. During the testimony, and I don't have the Senate hearing reports with me, and in talking to various police chiefs, there have been some instances where permits have been denied for people that have a legal right to own a gun. Maybe some people think that's okay. Some of us don't. If you're legally entitled to own a gun, you ought to be able to, on a day like this, wear a jacket when you go to the supermarket or do whatever else your business calls upon you to do. It's just common sense, without having to prove and wait that you're suitable. The issue of mental health, felons, and domestic violence were raised. So they're all covered by existing laws. If you've been adjudicated, for instance, with some kind of mental health issue, adjudicated in a court of law, you no longer have that constitutional right to keep and bear arms under the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution as well as the New Hampshire Constitution. The same is true for a domestic violence violation or if one has been convicted of a felony. With the New Hampshire crime line, which is the instant check line, so I've been told, the information is readily available at the time somebody is purchasing a gun if, for instance, that domestic violence conviction or that mental health adjudication has occurred. And so what we are talking about today, in my view, is whether we're going to make it easier for people that are law-abiding New Hampshire citizens to be able to carry a weapon on a concealed basis, which I think, if we all ask ourselves, we would prefer to see people carrying these weapons on a concealed basis, not openly, which they have every right to do. And I realize that on an emotional issue, no one wants to look at statistics anymore. But it's interesting that the 2015 FBI violent crime statistics just came out in the last couple of days. While there's been a slight uptick nationally in the number of violent crimes, we do have the distinction of being the fourth safest state in the country, with Virginia virtually tied with us, slightly ahead, but Maine, that recently adopted this legislation, significantly ahead of us, and Vermont, who has never required a permit to carry on a concealed basis a handgun, being the safest state in the nation. We are witnessing across our country so many of these violent incidents. There is no question about that. But let's face the facts. Would we rather be New Hampshire, one of the safest states in the nation, and a state that protects people's constitutional amendments? Or would we rather be, for instance, other states? And I think of Chicago, which has been all over the national news, with violent crime rates soaring and having one of the nation's toughest gun laws. If we believe that the Constitution gives us a right to protect our lives, our loved ones, and our liberties, we're going to vote today to overturn this veto and restore to our citizens that right to protect their lives, their liberties, and their loved ones. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Bradley. Senator Sanborn?
Mr. President, I rise and join the fine senator from District Number 3 and District Number 8 to ask this entire body to please reconsider and vote to overturn this veto. Mr. President, as an Irishman, I've had a lifetime of separation and racism all the way back to the first time my family and our family came to America. We've all seen the signs, Irish no need to apply for the job, Irish not welcome here. We know that for a very long time in our country, laws have been passed that we have later reconsidered and changed because they were wrong. I think often when my good friend from District Number 1 regularly quotes the fine Governor Thompson, saying at that time he didn't believe there was a need to overturn and provide the right for concealed carry. But Mr. President, I can only think of what Governor Thompson would say today. As the senator from District 3 talked about a few minutes ago, it's a much different world today than it was back in the easy, carefree days of Governor Thompson. You know, there's been a large separation where people stand and what they believe in and where they think their concerns are. And I would think that for no other reason than some people's concern and some people's fear and some people's visual of seeing someone carrying a gun on their hip in a holster. Wouldn't they want them to be able to conceal it so it doesn't make them uncomfortable? Instead, what failure to override this veto will do is to force people to disarm. If someone's been hunting out in the woods, it's hunting season. It's a great time of year for our traditional New Hampshire values. And you come out of the woods with your pistol strapped to your side and decide to stop at the local grocery store to pick up some food for the way home because you're as unsuccessful as my wife continues to seem to be at bringing home the meat, forgetting to take your gun out and walk into a store could make people uncomfortable. Or maybe you just say to yourself, look, I don't want to make people uncomfortable, so I'll just throw a jacket on. There's a difference between guilty and not guilty. Guilty and not guilty. I think we really need to consider whether or not this is as much of a deal as my good friends are making it. 17 other states in America say this is something we should be supporting. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, yet another state, after Maine, said so. And I'd love to hear from my friend at District Number 1 as to why Vermont, who is clearly cannot be considered a bastion of conservatism politically, fully embraces this. And why have we turned this into a political fight when it shouldn't be? Vermont's the safest state in the nation. Hard time even being a Republican in that state, but yet they fully embrace it. They embrace people's rights to own a firearm and to carry it either concealed or not concealed. I struggle all the time. In fact, spoke to the Senate President of Maine, who, Mr. President, you know is a very close friend of mine, about our constant need for New Hampshire to continue to stay competitive and not allow our bordering states to have lower taxes or less regulation, because we want to continue to show that New Hampshire is the freest state in America and the most competitive. But with both Vermont and Maine actually passing this law and New Hampshire continuing to do so, sends a very chilling statement about the perception of people's rights to keep and bear arms. And I hope my colleagues will join several of us to overturn this veto to ensure we can continue to be that free state. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Sanborn. Senator D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to ask my colleagues, my brothers and sisters in the Senate, to sustain the governor's veto. I was alive and well during those 1970s when one of our colleagues said it was ecstasy. Well, man, let me tell you something. The Supreme Court declared our commuter tax unconstitutional, and New Hampshire was driven almost into bankruptcy. That's number one. We had to deal with that situation. That wasn't ecstasy. That was goddamn tough. Secondly, we had the Seabrook riots. We had 2,000 people in armories, and we were taking care of them. They were arrested for trying to go and destroy Seabrook. governor and council had to deal with that. We had to feed them, we had to clothe them, we had to allow them to take their showers. Our state police were on alert 24/7. If you think that's ecstasy, brother, we have a significant problem. A very significant problem. Those were the most difficult days for the state of New Hampshire, and we got through it. We got through it because we're a state with a lot of courage, with a lot of stamina, and with the ability to deal with problems. This is not a problem. We don't have to deal with this. We're one of the safest states in the United States. It's a great place to bring up children. We're considered a great place to bring up children. Gun laws are very pervasive in our state. Everybody can carry a gun. The only thing is you need a permit for a concealed weapon. Man, that's pretty liberal. And to think Meldrum Thompson, who I served with both as a member of the House of Representatives and a member of the Executive Council, and he was no piece of cake, I'll tell you. No piece of cake. And yet he thought what we had in place was suitable and good for New Hampshire. You know, we should be students of history. We should know history. And history presents opportunities for us so that we don't make the same mistakes in the future that we made in the past. We're a safe state. We're a great place to bring up children. All of my children live in New Hampshire. All of my grandchildren live in New Hampshire. All of my great-grandchildren live in New Hampshire. It's a pretty good place to be. We amended the Constitution twice to make it a better state. One, to allow Catholics to hold public office. I thought that was a brilliant move. Brilliant move. And I got to sit here, I got to sit in the House, I got to sit on the Executive Council, because New Hampshire was smart enough to overturn that situation. By 6 votes. 6 votes made that possible. So when we make a mistake, we correct it. In this situation, we don't have to correct the mistake. We have to move forward. Mr. President, thank you very much. Let's get on with the process.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro. To the younger people in the room, 6 is this. Okay, this is 5. I just want to make sure we get that straight. Is there any further discussion? A roll call is required. Are you ready for the question? Clerk will call the roll.
Senator Woodburn.
No.
Senator Forster.
Yes.
Senator Bradley.
Yes.
Senator Waters.
No.
Senator Cataldo.
Yes.
Senator Hosmer.
No.
Senator Sanborn.
Yes.
Senator Kelly.
No.
Senator Daniels.
Yes.
Senator Avard.
Yes.
Senator Lasky.
No.
Senator Carson.
Yes.
Senator Feltes.
No.
Senator Booton.
Yes.
Senator Reagan.
Yes.
Senator Susie.
No.
Senator Birdsell.
Yes.
Senator D'Alessandro.
No.
Senator Fuller Clark.
No.
Senator Prescott.
Yes.
Senator Stiles.
Yes.
Senator Morse.
Yes. The noes have it. The governor's veto on Senate Bill 336 is sustained, lacking the necessary 2/3 vote, 13-9. Let me just go to another part.